Cattle Baron thought he was marrying an ugly woman in an arranged marriage, but was shocked when destiny unfolded. In the Texas Panhandle, October of 1874 carried a chill across the endless prairies where cattle herds stretched to the horizon, and the sound of boots echoed on wooden floors inside dim saloons. Yet even in this wide frontier, one man carried a heavier silence than the wind. William Carter, the wealthiest cattle baron for miles, a figure feared for his power but pitied for his solitude, for beneath his iron image lay years of loneliness. So when talk spread of his arranged marriage, the townsfolk whispered with sharp tongues that he had settled for a woman no man desired, a woman spoken of as plain, even ugly, and William himself believed those rumors. Resigned to duty rather than hope, he signed his name to the agreement with little care, thinking love was a luxury he would never know. Yet he did not realize destiny was already riding toward him, with a secret that would shake his pride and change his life forever. The morning of the wedding broke beneath a pale sun, its light cutting through the dust that curled above the Texas Panhandle, and William Carter stood on the steps of the small wooden church, with his hat tilted low, staring at the horizon where the road bent into the town. His jaw tight as whispers rolled through the crowd gathering around him, words spoken in hushed tones that carried sharp edges. The people murmuring of the baron's unlucky bride, a woman they said no man would choose if choice were his. And though William held his shoulders stiff, inside he felt the heavy weight of shame and resignation. For he had convinced himself the rumors were true, and that he was walking into a future carved by duty and nothing more. And then the sound of carriage wheels broke the air, iron rims rattling against the hard ground as horses pulled a plain buggy into view, its paint chipped and dull, no lace, no ribbons, only the tired creak of wood announcing the arrival of the woman who would soon bear his name. The air seemed to pause as the door opened slowly, and a slender figure stepped down, her movements quiet and careful, dressed in a faded gown that spoke more of modesty than of celebration, her hands folded close to her body, and her head bowed beneath a thin veil that covered her face from curious eyes. She carried no ornaments, no sparkle of jewelry to soften the whispers, only a small bundle tied in cloth that told of a woman with little to her name, and William felt his throat tighten, not from anger, but from a dull disappointment that settled deeper with every glance, for he had expected no more than this. A simple woman marked by gossip and stripped of dignity before she even set foot on his land. Yet he forced his face to remain unreadable as he touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of courtesy, hiding the flicker of doubt that stirred inside him. The people around leaned closer, some nudging each other, waiting for the first clear look at her face, but she kept her veil low, her steps measured as if she wished to vanish into the wood of the church before anyone could truly see her. And William walked beside her, his boots striking the ground in a rhythm heavy with pride and reluctance, his mind caught in the thought that this was to be his life, bound to a stranger whose silence felt heavier than any storm. Yet within that silence there was something he could not name, something that unsettled the certainty he thought he carried. And though his heart was closed, a faint unease spread through him as if the air itself warned that the truth behind that veil was not what he imagined, that perhaps fate was waiting for the right moment to turn every whisper into dust. Inside the wooden church, the air was heavy with silence, broken only by the low creak of pews as townsfolk leaned forward to witness the moment, their eyes fixed on the veiled bride who stood beside William Carter beneath the shadow of the cross, her hands folded tightly against the faded fabric of her gown. And as the preacher's voice rolled steady through the vows, William felt each word strike against him like a hammer. For though his posture was proud, his heart carried an uneasy weight. Then the preacher paused and asked the bride to reveal herself before God and husband. And with a slow breath, Eleanor raised trembling fingers to the edge of her veil, the room tightening in suspense as every whisper fell silent, until the thin cloth lifted and fell back to her shoulders, and what appeared beneath drew a stunned gasp from the crowd. For instead of the plain, unwanted woman William had prepared himself to see, before him stood a figure radiant in simplicity, her face soft yet strong, her eyes bright with a quiet courage that held the room captive. And in that instant, the cattle baron who had thought himself hardened by years of solitude felt his chest strike with disbelief, his mind flooding with shame for the shallow judgment he had carried, while around him the same voices that once whispered cruel words now hushed as though the truth itself had stolen their breath. Eleanor did not smile with vanity, nor carry the arrogance of beauty. Instead, her expression shone with a dignity that came from within, and William realized her choice of modest dress and humble carriage had been no accident. It was a test of character, for she valued respect above appearance, substance above rumor, and in her quiet strength she had already proven herself greater than the false stories spread against her. William's throat tightened, not from disappointment as he had feared, but from a sudden guilt that burned against his pride, for he had accepted gossip as truth without offering her a chance to be known. And as the vows continued, he felt his resolve falter, not from weakness but from a stirring sense of awe, the kind that bends even the proudest man. While Eleanor's voice, gentle yet unwavering, echoed through the small chapel as she promised loyalty and trust, words that carried more power than jewels or wealth. And in that moment, William knew he was standing not before an unlucky bride, but before a woman who could command respect without demanding it, a woman who had already reshaped the path of his life by simply lifting a veil. And though the townsfolk sat in silence, their earlier whispers turned to unspoken shame, William's heart thundered with the realization that fate had never betrayed him. It had given him a gift disguised in modest cloth, a gift he had nearly cast aside because of pride. And as their hands met beneath the preacher's blessing, he felt the weight of his own blindness, and the promise of a future he had never believed possible began to take root inside him. When the vows were spoken and the church emptied into the dust of the afternoon, William walked beside Eleanor with a storm in his chest, the weight of shame pressing against every breath as he remembered how quickly he had believed the cruel tongues of strangers. And though she carried herself with calm grace, he could not silence the guilt that gnawed inside him, for each glance at her reminded him that he had judged unfairly. Yet Eleanor sensed the silence between them, and in the quiet of the ranch house she told him the truth he had never expected, that the whispers of ugliness had not been born from her reflection, but from the bitterness of neighbors who scorned her family's poverty, a household that had struggled to survive drought and hunger while others mocked instead of helped. Her voice steady yet touched with pain as she spoke of those years, and William felt his chest twist with regret for every careless thought he had allowed. Still, before he could speak his own apology, the land itself roared with a sudden thunder of hooves, the ground trembling as a herd of frightened cattle broke loose beyond the corral, dust rising like a storm as beasts surged toward the open plain, ranch hands shouting in panic as ropes flew and horses bucked. William rushed forward, but in the chaos he turned and saw Eleanor already running without fear, seizing a fallen lasso from the ground and swinging it with a precision that startled even the seasoned cowboys, her voice cutting through the clamor as she guided men twice her size, her skirts torn by the wind as she stood firm against the charging mass. And in that wild moment, William watched her not as the bride he had pitied, but as a woman of steel whose courage burned brighter than any doubt. Together they fought until the herd slowed and the dust cleared, and when the last steer was driven back into the pen, he saw Eleanor standing with her chest heaving, her eyes blazing not with vanity but with strength earned through hardship. And he knew then that she was not only beautiful in the way the world counted beauty, but in a deeper way that outshone the lies of the town, admiration swelling in him until respect replaced the hollow pride he had clung to for so long. And as he stepped toward her, hat in hand, words finally broke free, not grand declarations but a raw honesty, an acknowledgement of the shame he carried and the honor she had shown. And in the fading light of that evening, William felt the ground shift beneath him, for this marriage was no longer a duty carved by arrangement. It was the beginning of something stronger than rumor, built not on appearances, but on the fire of truth and the bond of survival shared under the open sky. As the days turned into weeks, William felt the rough edges of his pride soften, until he understood that he had not only married beauty, but the rarest form of strength, for Eleanor carried within her a loyalty that could not be bought, and a courage that no storm could break. And in her presence he found himself humbled, learning that love was not a weakness but a force greater than wealth or power. The same townsfolk who once whispered cruel lies now lowered their eyes in silence as they saw her ride beside him at dusk, the prairie stretching wide beneath a sky painted with fire. And William no longer walked as the untouchable baron but as a man transformed, his heart bound not by arrangement but by devotion. And in that quiet sunset, he knew the truth that would remain long after the dust of their time had settled, that true worth is never shaped by rumor but revealed by the soul.